Imagine this. You can make people follow you without ever giving a command, without speaking a word, without threats or pressure of any kind. So, what's the secret? The answer is fear, and the subtlety in how you create it. The hidden power of fear. Imagine a world where the most powerful force isn't kindness, intelligence, or loyalty. It's something far darker, something that doesn't demand respect, but commands it silently. That force is fear, not the loud, obvious kind, but the quiet, insidious type that works in the background, shaping decisions, molding behavior, and ensuring control without uttering a single word. Fear is not just an emotion, it's a tool. It's the invisible hand that guides people to act in ways they never would on their own, pushing them to follow your lead because the alternative, what happens if they don't, seems far worse. This isn't about manipulating their actions through threats or promises. It's about creating an environment. Think about it. When you don't know what someone will do next, when their actions are unpredictable, your mind races. You begin to second-guess yourself. You wonder, what if I misstep? The fear of making that misstep becomes stronger than any logic or reason. You conform. You comply. This is why Machiavelli famously said, "It is better to be feared than loved." Fear breeds respect. It forces people to act in ways that protect themselves, and in doing so, they end up acting in ways that serve your interests. When you operate from a place of fear, you don't need to make demands. Your very presence, your unpredictability, your silence creates an atmosphere where compliance is inevitable. Imagine yourself as the silent leader, the one who doesn't mean to say anything, yet everyone follows. How? It's simple. You make people fear what might happen if they don't. This fear doesn't need to be loud or aggressive. It doesn't need to be a direct threat. It's the uncertainty of not knowing what will happen if. This subtle manipulation is what gives you true power. When people are afraid of the consequences of not complying with you, whether that's a loss of status, security, or opportunity, they will fall in line. Fear is the invisible force that holds everything together. And once you understand how to harness it, you don't need. Part 2. Fear without words. The silent manipulation. Imagine wielding control over others without ever raising your voice, without giving any direct command, and without ever having to threaten them. How is this possible? It's through fear, the kind of fear that isn't spoken, what's silently implied. Fear that doesn't need to be seen, but felt. Fear that lingers in the air, a quiet pressure that compels action without a single word. This is the art of silent manipulation, the ability to control people's actions through an atmosphere of uncertainty, where they don't know exactly what will happen next. The key here is unpredictability. When your actions and reactions are unpredictable, people begin to fear the consequences of doing something wrong. It's that fear of unknown that forces them to act, often in your favor, even if they don't realize it. Fear, in its most potent form, doesn't need to be loud or obvious. It doesn't need to be a physical threat or a direct confrontation. What it needs is to be pervasive, an underlying presence that people can't escape. This kind of fear is created by being unpredictable, by remaining emotionally distant, and by leaving others to wonder what you will do next. Think about a leader who never gives a direct answer, who leaves his subordinates guessing what their fate might be if they make a mistake. That leader doesn't need to say anything because the fear of the unknown does the work for him. The fear of being punished, being ignored, or being replaced keeps everyone on edge, making them conform to expectations without being explicitly told to do so. Let's look at an example. A manager who is silent most of the time, who doesn't praise or reprimand openly, but whose disapproval is always felt. Employees don't know if they've made a mistake or not. They live in a constant state of anticipation, wondering if they'll be the next one to be ignored or sidelined. This fear keeps them compliant. They are afraid of what they don't know, and that fear drives them to do things they might never have done under normal circumstances. The genius of this silent fear is that it forces compliance without any direct confrontation. The more unpredictable you are, the more people are willing to conform, just to avoid the discomfort of not knowing where they stand. They fear the uncertainty, and that fear compels them to act in ways that align with your needs. This form of control isn't about loud threats or overt actions. It's about creating an environment where people feel anxious and uncertain. They act not because they want to, but because they fear what might happen if they don't. And all this is achieved with nothing more than the silent power of fear. Imagine the fear that runs through someone when they realize that they are no longer needed. What happens when they are no longer seen as valuable? When they are no longer at the center of the group, or when they no longer have the power they once held? This fear of rejection, of losing something they hold dear, is a powerful tool that can be used to manipulate and control the behavior of others. The fear of rejection is one of the most primal fears we have. It's tied to our survival instincts. Thousands of years ago, being ostracized from a tribe meant death. You would be left alone, vulnerable, and exposed to dangers. The same instinct applies today, even though we may not be facing physical dangers. In modern life, rejection manifests as being ignored, being passed over, or being excluded. This fear drives people to act in ways they might otherwise avoid, just to keep their place in the social or professional hierarchy. When you make someone feel that they are at risk of losing their place in the group, their job, their social status, or their position of power, you ignite this fear, and that fear compels them to act in your favor. The fear of being rejected makes them follow your lead, not because they want to, but because they are terrified of what will happen if they don't. Think of a manager who, instead of giving direct orders, uses subtle exclusion. They praise one employee and ignore another. They make it clear that only certain individuals are in the know, while others are left in the dark. This exclusion doesn't need to be stated outright. The fear of rejection is enough to get people to fall in line. They will do anything to avoid being left out, to avoid the possibility of being disregarded, which makes them comply with your wishes without hesitation. Fear of rejection works because it taps into something deep inside us. We all want to be seen, to be valued, to feel important. When we fear that we might lose that, we'll go to great lengths to keep it. This fear pushes us to behave in ways that maintain our position, protect our status, and ensure our survival in the group. And when you know how to exploit this fear, you gain a level of control over others that doesn't require threats or direct authority. This is why rejection, or the mere fear of it, can be a tool for compliance. You don't need to force someone to act. You just need to make them fear the loss of their position, their influence, or their connection to you. And once they feel that fear, they will follow your lead, no questions asked. Insecurity is a silent force that influences every action, every decision. It's subtle, yet pervasive, and it is often more effective than direct threats or pressure. Insecurity doesn't need to be declared or even acknowledged. It simply exists, lurking beneath the surface, driving people to behave in certain ways without ever realizing the true cause of their actions. When you can make someone feel insecure about their position, their abilities, or their value, you have them. Insecurity is the perfect breeding ground for fear, and where there is fear, there is control. People who feel insecure will do whatever they can to avoid the pain of that insecurity. They will work harder, be more compliant, and seek your approval, because the alternative, living with the fear of being exposed or excluded, is far worse. This form of manipulation works because insecurity feeds off itself. Once a person starts to feel insecure, they begin to doubt their worth and place in the group. They constantly seek validation, constantly fear rejection, and constantly try to please those in authority, hoping to gain back the sense of security they've lost. Imagine a workplace where the atmosphere is subtly charged with insecurity. Employees are always second-guessing themselves, unsure whether they are doing enough or whether they will be replaced. They don't know where they stand with their boss, and they never receive clear feedback. This uncertainty feeds their insecurity, which drives them to work harder, be more agreeable, and take on tasks they might not otherwise want to do, just to avoid the sting of rejection or failure. This is how you can manipulate someone without ever saying a word. You don't need to tell them that they're inadequate. You just need to leave them uncertain. When they don't know where they stand, when they're constantly questioning their place, they will naturally align with your desires. Their need to be accepted, to be reassured, becomes a tool you can wield to get them to follow your lead. The genius of this manipulation lies in the fact that it's invisible. People aren't aware of the insecurity that controls their actions. They think they are simply striving to do better, to please you. But in reality, they are driven by a fear of being exposed as inadequate. And as long as you keep them uncertain, you will have them right where you want them. Failure is the ultimate fear that lies at the core of most people's actions. It's not just about losing something. It's about losing everything. Their reputation, their job, their place in society. The fear of failure, like a silent force, pushes people to perform, to conform, to act in ways that they would not normally consider, all because they are terrified of what might happen if they fail. But here's the truth that many fail to understand. You don't need to directly tell someone that failure is imminent. The mere possibility of failure is enough. When people fear the consequences of failure, whether it's public humiliation, being passed over for a promotion, or losing the trust of their peers, they will do anything to avoid it. This fear drives them to act in ways that ensure their survival in their social or professional circles. Think about the workplace or the classroom. Imagine an environment where failure is not an option, where every move is scrutinized, where the pressure to succeed is unrelenting. In this environment, the fear of failure becomes a weapon that you can wield to control behavior. People will comply, go above and beyond, and perform at their highest level, not because they want to, but because they fear what will happen if they don't. In the world of Machiavellian tactics, controlling someone's fear of failure is one of the most powerful ways to gain compliance. You don't need to force them to act. You don't need to push them. You simply need to make them afraid of the consequences of failure. The fear of looking incompetent, of being judged, of failing publicly
is enough to make people fall in line with your wishes. And once you've planted that seed of fear, you no longer need to ask for their obedience. They will give it to you freely, driven by their own fear of failure. But the genius of this tactic is that you don't need to use direct threats. You don't need to point at a person and tell them they'll fail. You simply need to create an atmosphere where the fear of failure is always present. You need to make sure that everyone knows that their place in the system is precarious, that they must keep performing, keep delivering, or risk being discarded. Once people live under the constant pressure of fearing failure, their behavior becomes predictable. They will do whatever it takes to avoid the consequences of failure. They will work harder, be more compliant, and follow your every instruction, not because they trust you, but because they fear what will happen if they don't.
Part 6. The Fear of Exclusion. How Social Isolation Fuels Compliance. One of the most potent fears in human nature is the fear of being excluded, of being cast aside, of being forgotten. This fear doesn't just stem from loneliness. It's a deep, primal fear that strikes at the heart of our need for connection, belonging, and recognition. And when you understand how to use this fear, you can control others in ways they'll never see coming. Exclusion from a group is more than just a social inconvenience. It's a threat to one's status, identity, and survival. When people feel they're on the outside looking in, when they're excluded from the conversations, the decisions, the power, they feel as if they have nothing left. The fear of being cast out is one of the strongest motivators for compliance, and it's a fear that doesn't need to be openly discussed. It operates quietly in the background, driving behavior. In a workplace, for example, the fear of exclusion is a powerful force. Imagine you're working with a team, and you know that if you don't meet certain expectations, you'll be left out of important meetings, excluded from decisions, or overlooked for promotions. The mere possibility of being excluded from the group drives you to work harder, to perform better, and to align yourself with the group's values and goals. You act not because you love your job, but because you fear the consequences of being left behind. This is where manipulation of the fear of exclusion becomes a masterstroke in control. You don't need to threaten someone directly. You don't need to tell them that they'll be left out. Just make them feel like their position in the group is precarious, and that fear will do the rest. Take, for example, a political leader who subtly makes their followers feel like they're part of a select, powerful group. The moment anyone steps outside the norms of the group or questions the leader, they risk being excluded. They are made to feel as if their membership is conditional, that their value comes from staying in line with the group's ideals. Fear of exclusion pushes them to comply, to suppress their own opinions, and to follow the leader's will without question. This is the quiet strength of the fear of exclusion. It works silently, invisibly, and with devastating effectiveness. People will align themselves with you not because they want to, but because they fear being left out, being deemed unworthy, or being isolated. The fear of being excluded from something important is enough to keep them on your side, to keep them following you without a word being said. And once you understand this, you can manipulate not just individuals, but entire groups. You can create a culture of fear around exclusion, where the fear of being cast out forces people to comply with your will. They will work harder, be more obedient, and act more in line with your desires, all because they fear the isolation that comes with defying you. There is one fear that transcends all others, one that forces even the most confident and powerful individuals to act in ways they wouldn't normally choose. It is the fear of the unknown, the fear of what lies ahead, and the fear of not being able to predict the future. This fear, when wielded properly, can be the most powerful tool in your arsenal. The fear of the unknown is not just about the fear of what might happen, but the fear of being unprepared for it. People fear what they cannot anticipate, what they cannot control, and this fear pushes them to act in ways that secure their place in a world full of uncertainty. When you create an environment where uncertainty reigns, you have the power to dictate how people behave, what they do, and what they fear. In a leadership context, unpredictability becomes a strategic advantage. If you are unpredictable, if you change your expectations, your moods, your actions without warning, you create an environment where people must constantly be on guard. They can no longer rely on predictability. They must guess what you want, what you expect, and what will happen if they make the wrong move. This fear of uncertainty forces compliance. Think of a boss who rarely communicates their expectations clearly. One day they praise an employee for something small. The next day they are completely silent. The employee is left wondering, what did I do wrong? Why am I not receiving the same level of praise or attention? The fear of the unknown, of not knowing where they stand, forces them to work harder, to stay on edge, to try to please you at every turn. This is how you can subtly manipulate people into doing exactly what you want without them ever realizing it. They will work harder not because they feel motivated by a specific goal, but because they fear what will happen if they don't keep up with your unpredictable behavior. They fear the consequences of being left in the dark, ignored, or sidelined. The unpredictability you bring to the table doesn't need to be drastic. It can be subtle shifts in how you interact with people and how you reward them or reprimand them. But over time, as they realize that they can't predict what will come next, they will begin to act according to your unspoken rules. They will try to stay in your favor, not because they like you, but because they fear what might happen if they don't. In this way, unpredictability becomes a silent enforcer of obedience. You don't need to tell people to follow you. They will do so out of fear of what could happen if they step out of line. They will comply not because they trust you, but because they can't afford to face the unknown consequences of failing to comply. Part 8. The fear of losing control. How insecurity drives obedience. The fear of losing control is a fear that eats away at the core of every ambitious person. It's the fear that drives a person to act, to strive, and to protect what they've worked so hard to build. It's the fear of vulnerability, of being exposed, of being overwhelmed by forces they cannot manage. And it's a fear that can be used to manipulate the behavior of others in the most subtle of ways. When you can make someone fear losing control, whether it's over their emotions, their situation, or their environment, you hold the key to their compliance. People will fight tooth and nail to maintain control over their lives and their circumstances, even if that control is only an illusion. The fear of losing that control,
of being rendered helpless, compels them to follow the path you've laid out for them, because they fear the consequences of doing otherwise. Think of a person who is in a leadership position, but is constantly worried about losing that position. They may appear confident, but deep down, they are terrified of what might happen if they slip up, if they lose their grip on their power. This fear doesn't need to be overt. It doesn't need to be displayed for everyone to see. It's the quiet anxiety that gnaws at them, driving them to act in ways that seem calculated, but are actually driven by the underlying fear of losing control. Now imagine the effect this fear has on those around them. Employees, followers, or peers can sense this insecurity. They can feel the tension, the constant effort to maintain a facade of control. And when they sense this weakness, they begin to adjust their behavior. They begin to anticipate every move, every decision, and they act accordingly. Not because they trust the leader, but because they fear what will happen if they push too far or question authority. This fear is subtle but incredibly effective. The more someone fears losing control, the more they will try to maintain it. They will comply with your wishes, follow your orders, and do everything in their power to stay on the good side of the person who holds the power. The fear of losing control makes people more obedient, more aligned with your desires, because they fear the fallout of stepping out of line. In this way, the fear of losing control becomes a tool of power. You don't need to directly threaten someone. You don't need to assert dominance aggressively. Simply make them fear the loss of control, and they will do whatever it takes to ensure they don't lose it.
There is one fear that holds the power to make even the most confident person bend to your will. It's not the fear of failure, nor the fear of rejection. It's the fear of becoming obsolete, of being replaced, of being discarded like a worn-out tool. This fear, more than anything else, drives people to comply, to conform, and to sacrifice their individuality just to ensure they remain relevant. In today's world, where the pace of change is faster than ever, the fear of becoming irrelevant is stronger than ever. People fear being replaced by someone younger, faster, or more capable. They fear that their skills, their expertise, or their position in life will no longer be needed. And this fear pushes them to act in ways that may go against their own desires, simply to hold on to what they have. The genius of this fear lies in its subtlety. You don't need to tell someone that they will be replaced. You just need to make them feel that it's a possibility. Once they believe that their place is threatened, they will do whatever it takes to keep it. They will conform to your expectations, align with your demands, and follow your lead, all because they fear that any misstep could lead to their obsolescence. Think about the workplace. Imagine an employee who has spent years working at a company only to suddenly feel that their position is no longer as secure as it once was. They see younger, more energetic employees coming in, and they fear that their experience is no longer enough to keep them relevant. This fear of being replaced is a powerful tool for control. You don't need to threaten someone directly. You don't need to point out their shortcomings or mistakes.
simply create an atmosphere where they believe that their place is at risk, and they will do anything to prove their worth, to maintain their relevance. This is why in a Machiavellian system, the threat of obsolescence is often a subtle yet potent motivator for compliance. People will follow your lead, not because they want to, but because they fear that if they don't, they will be replaced. The fear of becoming irrelevant, of being left behind, forces them to conform to your needs, to do what you want, and to stay in line with the system you have created. At the heart of every human being lies a deep, often unspoken fear. The fear of being inadequate. The fear that they are not enough, that they are incapable, that they will be judged and found wanting. This fear is insidious because it doesn't always show on the surface. It's a quiet, lingering feeling that makes people second-guess themselves, hold back, and constantly strive to prove their worth. In a world that rewards success and punishes failure, the fear of inadequacy is a constant companion. People fear that their abilities won't measure up, that they will be exposed as frauds, or that they will be seen as incapable. This fear can be a powerful motivator, but it can also be used as a tool of manipulation. When you can make someone feel inadequate, when you can make them doubt their own abilities, you gain a significant amount of control over them. Insecurity breeds conformity. The more someone doubts themselves, the more they are likely to seek external validation, to follow others' lead, and to comply with demands in order to feel better about their place in the world. Think about a situation where someone is constantly being told they're not good enough. Whether it's a boss who withholds praise or a group of peers who subtly undermine them, this constant reinforcement of inadequacy forces the person to act in a way that aligns with the group's expectations. They try harder, they work longer, they suppress their own desires, all because they are afraid of being judged as inadequate. This fear of inadequacy doesn't always have to be blatant. It can be subtle. It can come in the form of a slight, a quiet comment, or even a gesture that implies someone's efforts are never enough. Over time, the person begins to internalize these messages and feels the pressure to constantly prove their worth. This fear pushes them to do things they might not otherwise consider, all in an attempt to feel validated, to feel competent, to feel worthy. In Machiavellian tactics, this manipulation of self-doubt can be used to keep people in line. You don't need to directly control them. All you need to do is make them feel like they're constantly falling short. Once you plant that seed of insecurity, they will act in ways that serve your needs, just to avoid the feeling of inadequacy. They will comply, conform, and sacrifice their own interests to prove to you and to themselves that they are capable. The fear of inadequacy is one of the most powerful psychological tools for compliance, because it operates on a deeply personal level. People will do almost anything to escape the pain of feeling inadequate. They will follow your lead, work harder, and give in to your demands because they fear the consequences of not measuring up.